decision and a responsible decision to use the money or to use the lending and the finance. So I think that's a concern that I have, to reduce uncertainty, complexity, and also uh, increase access to finance through AI. And I think regulation can help that. I don't know if it can solve the problem, but can be a tool to help in this scenario.
And I think last question for me, and then I think we hopefully have a little bit of a few minutes, maybe just to open it up and see if there's any questions from you guys over there. But if you were a regulator and you were to regulate this space for financial institutions, like what would be some of the things that you would do and do tomorrow? And I'm going to start out with you, Casper. So if you had to, if now you're giving the power to regulate the industry, massive investments, huge amounts of data. You pointed towards some of the challenges, right? Some of the what should we be afraid of? What would you do?
Well, yes, and that gives me an opportunity to actually zoom a little bit in on the financial industry, which is one of the areas that's impacted by actually both of the risks that we just talked about. And I think, first of all, and back to the definition, we need to agree on the financial frame, on the ethical framework on which we're actually operating on. So I think that, and it probably cannot be on a global scale, but we have to make sure that we get these clear definitions of what are the ethical principles that we want our regulation in finance to actually be based on. And then there's like all the usual ways that you would implement that with auditing systems. But I have a specific concern that I like to highlight when I talk about this, and that is, we know for a fact that when you train people in ethics, their ethical behavior does not improve. That's a thing that has actually been studied a lot. There is no real correlation between knowledge about ethical principles and ethical behavior. And that has, I think it's been linked with, it's a hypothesis, but it has in science been linked with the translation to smaller micro principles, or microethics as people call that. So I think that as a regulator, but even more maybe as a financial organization myself, I would, with my ethical framework in hand, define the micro-ethical principles. And that's all the way to, like, what if you build a bad chatbot, make sure it identifies itself as such. If you use a credit scoring algorithm, make sure that it is simple enough that a human can understand every detail in what it does, and so on and so forth. So if you can translate your ethical principles all the way down to, you can say, what if, or if then kinds of statements, and then build based on that. I think that's a bottom-up approach to making organizations, even individuals, act more in line with certain ethical principles.
Can I jump in here, Thomas?
Yeah,
I have a quick question. I know this is not my role, but I have a quick question, Casper. So you mentioned that you couldn't do this globally, but what if you have a global organization? How would you look at this then? So I guess if you have regulators within each country, region, like we would do things today, every single country, region would maybe be acting a little differently. That is really a challenge for a global organization. So any thoughts there?
Yeah, for sure. And any industry, the financial industry being so international as it is, would of course love to have standardized regulations across jurisdictions. That is not going to happen. We can wish for it, but I don't think so. So this is not going to be different, this area. So we'll have to get used to navigating that landscape. And here, I guess the good news is that one of the biggest potentials of AI actually is in making this kind of regulatory compliance, delegate that work to the artificial intelligence. So it's a tool that needs to be regulated, but it's also a tool that is going to help the industry implement those regulations in a much more elegant, smooth, and simple way than
hopefully without bias, right? Like we talked about earlier. One of the risks.
So it's really important that we keep highlighting, and I think particularly in the financial sector, this bias issue is major. And the solution is actually straightforward. Like, and again, let's look back to Tegmark's publications or some of the work that I've done, where it's like in those situations you might be able to get a few extra percentage of accuracy by using a black box artificial intelligence, one that does not explain itself. But in those situations, let's not. So when you're making decisions that are critical for human lives, let's not use black box artificial intelligence. I'm introducing the term black box here, but it's about whether the AI acts without being able to explain itself, which is something that humans can also do, or whether it acts after having constructed a rational explanation for why it did it, which is also something that humans can do. That's a symbolic versus sub-symbolic distinction.
Yeah.
Mary, quick 30-second take on, if you were in power, how would you regulate?
Well, I mean, this actually is a solution that is at the very core of all the issues we mentioned about not only fintech, but all sectors involved or using AI, I believe, is keeping human in the loop. While fintech in the global south in particular is really offering incredible potential for financial inclusion and efficiency, maintaining a human touch would ensure that this technology is indeed rooted in the reality of people's lives, respecting their dignity, and actually truly serving their needs. And there are various ways that we can actually ensure that we take this approach on board, like having localized human-centered design in testing phases of fintech solutions, of course, having cultural and social sensitivity while doing that, and having feedback loops, encouraging users to provide feedback. Overall, having a more tailored approach, I think, would be key, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach.
Vinicius, I'm going to end up with you, and then I think we have 30 seconds to answer a question I can see here Matthias has asked, but let's just get your take on it. How would you regulate?
So I would do the same as Casper, Liz, and Mary. I think they have very good strategies. I can add just one quick thing. I would try to focus on a framework of compliance by design, using all this information that can be gathered through AI, and try to focus maybe not so just on traditional regulation tools. And
then I can see Matthias here. He has a question. I guess it's a little bit in your end, Casper. Here, if we had this bigger than us autonomous AI, what would it do? Reproduce, enjoy sunsets, try to get rich? Casper, what would it do?
In 30 seconds. In 30 seconds. Well, in 30 seconds, the only feasible answer is I don't know. Like, first of all, we have the question, we have to understand the relationship between artificial intelligence and consciousness is actually a super important question. If we assume that AI will be like conscious in any sense of the word, regardless of your leaning in philosophy of mind, let's assume that, then we must also assume that it will try to optimize for whatever it considers important to itself. But there's already a big leap that Yudkowsky and Tegmark are making happily. I'm not against it, but I'm not sure it will happen either. Anyway, if that happens, yes, it will define what is good for itself, and then it will both optimize and evolve towards that using the good old-fashioned evolutionary principles. So all bets are off, actually. There's no reason to assume that it'll even try to preserve its life or not. We don't know, because that is based on the evolutionary scheme that we've evolved under. So that's a philosophical answer, but I guess a philosophical question demands that.
Thank you so much, Casper. And I think on that note, I think our time is up. And I'm just looking at Søren here. Yeah, he's nodding, so it is up.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Lisa, Mary, Casper, and Vinicius. Thanks for joining and sharing your insights and knowledge in this session. So thank you so much. Over to you, Søren.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you so much for being conscious of the time and for a really wonderful panel, an important panel discussion. So we've touched a very large number of issues through the day relating to the impact of technology and the access to capital and learning. in as and both sort of in the risks of technology in that relation, but also of course how we can leverage the powers of technology to secure better and access to capital learning for development. And we've come sort of pretty far in our discussion. We even as far as to the extinction scenarios and some of those very dire risks of AI. And we've broached through the day on governance in various aspects in the collaboration between industry and government, and how we can sort of manage triple helix relations and similar in establishing level playing fields and managing some of those risks. And we are extremely excited about our next panel here, looking exactly at these issues. And I'll be very brief in introduction, and then I'll ask you, when you do your first intervention, to just say a few words, highlighting how you relate to AI, what your sort of professional relation to AI and technology is in your work. But we are really grateful to be joined by Juliana Domingues, a public prosecutor with CADE in Brazil and former minister for consumer affairs. Another very close collaborator and friend, Kilian Broos, director in the European Commission. Matthias de Bièvre, who's also a very good friend and collaborator with Visions in France. And now I have to say you are all good friends. João Vasconcelos from the World Bank, manager of